Welcome, listeners, to a brand new episode of Oh My Word Podcast, a bonus episode of Oh My Word Podcast. And today, well, everyone be on their best behavior because today we've got an author, Gretchen McNeil, and she is the author of many, many murder mysteries. So everyone behave for Gretchen. We don't want to end up as a character in one of her books. No, just kidding. But Gretchen, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So here we go. Just to the basics. How did you get into writing? How did you get into writing, and why like murder mystery type stuff?
So I actually came to writing rather late. I know frequent stories that authors tell as I wrote when I was little. I wrote my first novel when I was 6. I was not that kid. I didn't keep a journal. I never wrote short stories. I was actually a performer. I started off as a tap dancer. I took voice lessons when I was in high school. I went to UCLA, and I have a bachelor's in vocal performance. And then I went to the Maryland Opera Studio at the University of Maryland College Park, where I have a master's in music and opera performance.
What?
Which is a very fancy way of saying
Yeah.
I used to be a singer.
Wow.
Yes, but I wasn't a very good one, or I probably wouldn't be here talking to you about how I write young adult novels. I tried many years, to sort of get into the business. It didn't work out. In the meanwhile, I did some television producing. I did some cartoon voiceover work. I sang with a circus troupe in Los Angeles for several seasons.
Oh my goodness.
But I know it's been a twisty, turny kind of life. But I started writing actually when I went through a divorce. I kind of woke up one day and felt completely lost. All of the things that I had used to define myself as a singer, working in television as a producer, those sorts of things were suddenly sort of gone. And I woke up and I said, I'm going to write a novel.
Wow.
And I did. I wrote a horrible novel. I joke it was an adult rom-com that was neither romantic nor funny. But I did sort of get addicted to the process of storytelling. I do a presentation for schools about this, about kind of like, the dream deferred and what happens. And what I realized much later in my writing process is that the storytelling that I'd been doing on stage since I was a young child was the same as the storytelling I was doing on the page. I just had to learn how to do it in, the area of writing as opposed to performance. And once I figured that out, and it took me a couple of manuscripts, but once I figured that out, I feel like I kind of had a sweet spot of voice and storytelling. As far as the horror genre and murder mysteries, I had written a young adult urban fantasy that is the one my agent signed me for that didn't sell to a publisher. And we were sort of discussing next steps, and I had mentioned I had this and I had this, and I said, I feel like there's a gap in the marketplace for the kind of books that I loved to read when I was a teen, which were horror, murder mysteries, gothic, things like that. And she said, do you have an idea? And I pitched her this idea, which is a YA exorcist novel. And that became Possessed, which was my debut. And way back in 2011. So I think I gravitated eventually toward the kind of books that I love to read in, those long ago days of my teens. And that's just sort of, it just came out of me so easily. I love the craft of scaring people.
Oh my goodness.
Which is a very sort of specific thing within writing. And I really do love creating scenarios and all sorts of, red herrings and, in film, it would be the jump scares. In fiction, it's a different process. It's a slower burn, but I love doing it, and I will do it as long as they let me.
Wow. So when you talk about that you're writing horror, you mean specifically jump scare kind of horror versus like the darkness of the human being type horror, or some of both, or?
It's sort of a mix of things. My books run a gamut,
Right.
10 definitely, which is a young adult homage to Agatha Christie's, and then There Were None, and Agatha Christie is my favorite writer of all. And it's much more, dead body reveals and creaky houses and scary storms and those sorts of things. So it definitely falls into a suspense and horror vibe. I don't tend to write a lot of paranormal horror. I've done a couple. I think Possess falls into that category. I have a book out with Epic Reads called Relic. That definitely was a paranormal horror. But for me, I think I'm more interested mostly in the darkness that humans perpetrate on each other, as opposed to, the paranormal. Most of my books, even the ones that aren't necessarily horror, but that are more murder mystery or suspense, all have that element. And I've mixed it with sometimes a kind of humorous sensibility. Hashtag murder trending and hashtag murder funding in particular are very over the top, highly stylized, almost comedy horror in kind of a Scream way. And I feel like those books might speak to my sort of personal sweet spot of writing the best.
Right.
Although not all of my books are humorous, they do have elements of humor. I do love to tell a good joke, but I think that mixing the salty and sweet of comedy and horror is something that I do love.
Great. And well, just as quick, because you mentioned Agatha Christie, what's your favorite Agatha Christie novel, or one of your top 5 or whatever, 3?
Right. Well, And Then There Were None is top of the tower as far as I'm concerned. The way she crafted that book, the way that it had not, and something that hadn't been done like that before. I'm not going to talk about the plot because I don't want to ruin it for anybody that hasn't actually read the book. I don't know who those people are.
Yeah.
I don't want to ruin it for you, because part of the enjoyment is not knowing what's coming.
Yeah.
Similarly, what she did with Murder on the Orient Express, that's another one that had not really been done before.
Right.
Murder of Roger Ackroyd is another one.
Yeah, that was great.
She was ahead of the curve for these books that had become sort of de rigueur in there. We set up a mystery, we have all of our suspects, and then we have a big reveal. And she did plenty of that, but she also did a lot of other amazing things. There's a little-known book called, but in terms of sort of her giant swath of fiction, there's a book called Man in the Brown Suit, which is actually a first-person narrative with a female protagonist, which is not something she did very often.
Yeah. And
if you haven't read it, it's wonderful. There's actually a decent romance too, which is also not something.
Yeah, that doesn't. Yeah, we're still talking about Agatha Christie, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I know, and it's a wonderful book, and it's one that when I talk to people who have read her but are not like rabid fans like me, they don't know or they haven't read. So I highly recommend it. I also love the first Tommy and Tuppence book, A Secret Adversary. It's one of the few full-length novels she did with those two characters. It's set right after the end of World War I, and it has she had several books that have these themes of global conspiracy, and it's one of them. And I love those characters. Again, it's a very feisty female heroine in Tuppence, and if you haven't read that, so I think I mentioned 5 there.
Yeah. Well, it's basically all of them, I think, was the answer, and then you're trying to just like pick out a few titles to name.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, those are the ones that sort of rise to the top, and that I've read all 5 of those multiple times. And I've read all of her books multiple times, but those are the ones I've read the most.
Right. I think she considered, is that correct, that she considered And Then There Were None as one of her favorites or something like that?
It was, and it's for a good reason,
right. Right,
it's a masterpiece.
And I also didn't realize that, because I've read a few of her books, and this is within the last few years that I've read them, I didn't realize that she kind of had like a resurgence. She was a big seller for a while, and then she kind of like sort of went to the side, and now all of a sudden, I don't know if it's film adaptations that'll bring her up again, but there's something that's like it's starting to, because now everywhere you see that they're promoting her books. Which is great.
She's had more things adapted, I think, than anyone but Shakespeare at this point, because you've had multiple reincarnations of Poirot and
right.
Miss Marple, her two most prominent or numerous protagonists. But you also had, now there was a Tommy and Tuppence show back in the 80s, I think it was, and now you have a new one that's on. There have been multiple adaptations of it, and then there were none, multiple adaptations of Murder on the Orient Express, and it just comes back around. They're doing Death on the Nile's coming out supposedly this year. movies are all, who knows when it's coming out ever again. But
there's no more schedule.
I think Death on the Nile has been filmed at least 3 times. So you have this sort of like, when especially television and film producers are looking for properties, they sort of go back to the well. What has worked before? What has a track record? And Agatha Christie has a track record.
Yeah. That's actually a good seg to talk about adaptations. But I did have to ask one more question first. When you said that growing up, you sort of wanted to be writing the books they grew up, that you wanted to see growing up. So are you saying that, after a certain point, when you're looking for books, you kind of like skipped because there's not a big enough young adult category, so you were reading like adult mysteries and things like that? You kind of just skipped over to that, or you had no book?
I mean, I'm older, and there was no young adult really when I was a teen. We had Christopher Pike was writing for teens. Lois Duncan was writing for teens.
Right.
You had older books like The Outsiders, and then you had series like Babysitter's Club, Sweet Valley High.
That's true.
A couple of Judy Blume's older books, but like Forever. But again, that was much earlier than I was a teen. There just wasn't. You would go into a bookstore and it was children's books and adult books, and that was it. And there wasn't this bridge kind of between the two things. So I graduated from reading middle grade Gothic, like John Bellairs. He wrote most famously The House with the Clock in Its Walls, but he wrote dozens of novels in the 70s primarily that were Gothic, paranormal, dark for their time. And I graduated from reading things like that to reading things like Wuthering Heights and, of course, Agatha Christie. And I really loved Victorian Gothic, short stories like Ambrose Bierce and Sheridan Le Fanu. Like those were the things that I read. And again, in the, it was 2009, I wrote Possess. Young adult, which had exploded at this point, had become very much about taking scary tropes, vampires, werewolves, ghosts, and things like that, and making them romantic, which is great. Like, I'm all for it. But it took away the fear. One more person tells me that Twilight's a horror novel, I'm going to be like, no, just because there's vampires in it doesn't mean it's a horror novel.
Right, exactly.
Nothing particularly tense or scary to me. It's much more about the relationships. And so I decided I wanted to bring the scary back. And I'm not the only author that did it. There are many authors, especially now, that are writing horror in YA, but it was definitely not as prevalent, a decade and a half ago.
Yeah, because I probably grew up also on the cusp of that YA was not so much a thing. I remember when Twilight came out, and then I saw later on, like, someone wrote this article about, whether or not you like Twilight, it did blow up. It did help to blow up the YA genre to prove that this is something worth investing in. Yeah.
But I got a book deal because of Twilight. I have absolutely no compunction about saying that.
Right.
My first book deal that came in 2010 was on the heels of the success of Twilight. And many, 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 many of us did.
It's funny because it just proves that if you can read Twilight and just say, like, what is this garbage? I'm not saying, but like you could say that, and then it just proves that, like, so why did it get so big? Like, I don't know, it just did.
There's a difference between I teach writing, and I tell my students this, and I try to hammer it home. I hammer home 2 points. The first of which is that publishing is not a meritocracy. And, we won't even go farther into that. But the second is that there is a difference between the technical craft of writing and the art of storytelling. And there are certain books that maybe are not as well crafted in terms of the writing, but the storytelling captures something intangible. I think of Da Vinci Code as a wonderful example of this, because I couldn't put that book down, but when I pick it up today and look at it, I'm like, oh, there's problems. There's like technical problems.
Right.
That if my student brought it to me, I would be like, all right, well, let's rip this apart and blah, blah, blah. But there is a storytelling element that is not as easy to teach. It is not as easy to diagnose. And there is, the Irish will call it like, the gift of Blarney, just being able to tell that story in a way that is compelling is something that a book like Twilight definitely captured.
Right. Would that be like sort of comparing the difference between people who have a natural skill as a storyteller versus people who actually work on the craft of storytelling, or that's related but not exactly the same thing?
I do believe that there are parts of this that you can learn and other parts that are more difficult to learn. Going back to my singing background, you can teach somebody to be a better singer. You can teach them aspects of singing and the technique of singing, or piano or violin or whatever instrument, you know.
Right.
There is a sort of soulful musicality, an understanding of the emotion of the music, an understanding of what it means, not just, you know, in the language, but in the actual music itself and how it was composed and how it feels to interpret for the audience, that is much more difficult to teach someone because you have to feel it. And storytelling is sometimes that kind of intangible feeling. You can definitely become a better storyteller, and learning the craft of writing, you know, characters and plot and pacing and descriptive and using internal monologue and all of those things to become a better storyteller. But there is also just sometimes, you know, we've all been at that family gathering where one person can captivate, you know, the 20 others at the table, just telling story after story. And we don't know why. Why is that person such a good storyteller? The story itself may not even have that much merit, but there's something compelling about the way it is being told, the narrative voice, the storytelling. And so that part is definitely something that's difficult to teach,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, it's like the authors that, I think there's so many good books out there, and then there's always that one author that you come across, or even one book from that author that you come across that you're like, I don't know what it is, but there's something different about this one. They hit something right in this one. Like whatever it is, they got it.
Yep.
Right. And you, most of the time you can't explain it.
I
Yeah.
think we all know, like in our own books, we all have that one or two where we're like, yeesh,
Yeah.
that didn't turn out quite the way I anticipated. Sometimes that happens in a great way. Sometimes in a great way.
That's true. That also just shows that there does have to be the point where you just have to let something go.
Yes.
Because yeah.
Yes. And sometimes the distance of time can help in solving the problem of a book that's not working. Unfortunately, in publishing, if you have a book under contract and it's not working, it becomes more difficult, right?
Right.
But I think taking some distance from it can definitely help. But also, there are some times that a book is just not, it's just not going to happen. And I have folders of those. So
Right. See, that's what I think also a lot of people don't realize, because especially if people are working on their first manuscript or even their second or third even, and they haven't been published, or those ones haven't been picked up yet, they think they put so much into their first manuscript and they think that this is it, that if it doesn't work, like they don't see anything past that. It's like everyone's got that. Everyone's got one or two or 10 of those.
yeah, and even when you have, I have a friend, actually a high school friend, who started writing a few years ago and just got a book deal. I'm so happy for her.
Yeah, well.
And what I mean, literally just got a book deal. And what I haven't said to her yet that I will say to her at some point is, as difficult as it is, right, to get published, to write the manuscript that lands the agent, that lands the book deal, it's what happens after that that's even more complex. And frequently that means you got to let it go. You can have a book that you poured your heart into. It's your debut novel. A lot of authors refer to things as the book of their heart. And it comes out. It doesn't end up on the New York Times bestseller list. It doesn't end up on, any YALSA lists or state lists. It doesn't make a huge splash. It sort of comes, it lingers, it goes, which is, by the way, most books that are published.
Yeah.
Okay? It's a crowded marketplace. And a lot of authors will have difficulty moving forward, writing the next book. And because they're still holding on to that one, trying to make it something out of it. And you can't. Once it's done, it's done. Write the next book, go on to the next idea, pour your heart into the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Careers that are made on one book are fewer and farther between these days. Most careers, like mine, are based on longevity.
Yeah.
have 10 books out. My 11th comes out in 2022, and my 12th will be out in 2023. I'm
Nice.
still here. I'm still making books. I've never been a New York Times bestseller. I've never even gotten a starred review from anybody, but I'm still here because I have been able to continue to write and to come up with new ideas and to not, let the ups and downs of publishing affect me too much.
Right. Are you sort of at the point of about a book a year? Is that kind of, you've kind of hit that spot at this point?
I've been doing almost a book a year since my debut in 2011. I had, I did 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15. Then I had 2 books out in 2016, no books out in 2017, and then 18, 19, 20, and then I have no books out this year, and then 22 and 23. And part of that is because I had 2 children in 2018 and 2020.
You didn't have your book babies, you had real babies instead.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's actually interesting that you mentioned that having, you haven't hit the New York Times bestseller list yet. I'm going to say yet. Who knows? Yet.
I mean, it's always a possibility. Every new book has the possibility to be a New York Times bestseller or not. You just have to don't give up hope, but also don't hang everything, on that hope.
Right. Well, also because I think I saw somewhere once that you can't exactly rig it, but you kind of could, because if certain books get more publicity, they're going to get more pre-orders and sales and stuff like that. So it's not because it's a better book sometimes, just because it's the book that was in everybody's faces, so they all bought it.
You don't get a lot of surprises on the New York Times bestseller list. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah, that's a very good way to say it. Yes. Yeah. But even with that, you still have a Netflix adaptation. So how does something like that happen for your, what is it? Don't Get Mad, Get Even, Don't Get Mad, Get Dirty, or what's the series called?
The series is called Get Even.
Okay.
Originally it was optioned by the BBC. They optioned there's 2 books in the series, Get Even and Get Dirty. They optioned it what feels like forever ago, but really wasn't. It's just time has no meaning anymore.
Yeah.
And then Netflix came on board as a co-production partner. So the book was originally, the books are set in Northern California. The adaptation put them in the Manchester area of England. And it was on BBC iPlayer for the first, February to July. I can't remember when it came out in the US. Again, time has no meaning anymore. But it was I think it was July of 2020. So iPlayer had it exclusively from February to July, and then Netflix did it worldwide, except in the UK in July. And now I think it's on Netflix in the UK as well. There was like a tiered sort of release structure. And again, I don't know. The real answer is I don't know how that happened. I didn't do with it. I don't know how my books ended up in the hands of a woman named Holly Phillips, who's the showrunner and show creator and the lovely force behind that series. I don't know how she found my books. I don't know why books that were set in Northern California somehow tickled her fancy, and she decided she needed to make that. I don't have an answer as to why I'm the lucky recipient of that. I am eternally grateful that they were my books that were chosen. It was the same with 10. 10, there was a Lifetime original movie made of 10 back in 2016. The director and executive producer was in Portland for business and was sort of trapped in Portland for like 2 or 3 weeks. And he went into Powell's bookstore in downtown Portland and was talking with a bookseller and, mentioned that he was a TV or a film producer and said, what's the one book that you would love to see adapted? And the bookseller handed him 10.
Wow.
And by the time we got back to New York, he was in touch with my agents. You can't, and that's a true story.
Yeah. Hello, yeah.
You can't control that, and nobody can. I get emails all the time, especially from young people saying, when are you going to make #MurderTrending or whatever into a movie? And I say, well, if you have a spare $10 to $20 million, let's do it, right?
Yeah.
And that would be on the low end for film. That would be practically an indie budget these days. These things are not in the control of the author. We don't, unless you are intimately connected with a production company, a director, an A-list celebrity, or something of that nature. These things are a realm apart from us. And again, dumb luck. I'd say the one thing that I had going for me with those 3 books in particular is that they're cheap. And what that means is 10 is like 3 sets. Get Even has no special effects. There's no, high fantasy costumes or worlds you have to create. So they can be done on a more limited budget, which means they're easier to sort of get through. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you don't think about that when you're writing.
Right. Yeah.
You just think about the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like they might not be the award winners, but they're all adaptable. So who comes out ahead, really?
Right. And and maybe I just don't write the kind of books that win awards, which is fine. I can only write the kind of books that I feel. But I'm perfectly happy if instead of awards I get some more TV or film adaptations. That'd be just fine with me.
Yeah, exactly. And how much say either between the Get Even ones or the 10? How much say do you have any input in the adaptation or
No,
so, none? You can't even say this may not be changed. It's just like they can do whatever they want with it at this point.
Now, if I was a more powerful author,
Right?
if I was somebody who had all of my books had been on the New York Times bestseller list for a year or two and had sold millions of copies, then in the process of, at that point, you're probably going to have multiple people that want to option it, which means there's going to be sort of a bidding war, a courtship, so to speak. And in that, they will give you a producer credit. They will give you casting approvals. They might give you script approval, or if it's a series, a chance to write an episode of it or something like that. But I'm not that author, so
Yeah.
so we don't have those things in my contract.
Did you get to see it at least before it came out, or you had to wait with everybody else to see it?
I did. I got screening links for the British before it came out in the UK in February. They sent us links so that we could watch it.
When you were watching it, was it like, wow, whose story is this? Or were you like, oh yeah, they put that in?
No, it's funny because first of all, I wrote those books in like 2013 and 14.
Ah, yeah, a while
yes,
ago.
2013 and 2014.
Yeah.
So, which again feels like forever ago, right? I've written several books since then, several new sets of characters, several new stories and plot lines, and there were moments where I thought, and you're transposing it from Northern California to the UK,
Right.
and the humor is sort of different, and some of the characters are different. But there were moments where I thought, is that in the book? I don't even remember. And I think that's probably a good thing because,
Yeah,
as I told Holly when we spoke via email, I said, these characters don't just belong to me anymore. They belong to us.
yeah,
This story, these girls, they're not just Gretchen McNeil anymore. They're the actresses who portrayed them, the writers who did the script, the executive producer who oversaw everything. It belongs to many people now.
is that a weird feeling, or that's just is?
It's not weird. It's humbling, I think.
Huh.
For me, it was very humbling that these many people spent so much time and creative energy to make this happen. I have no problem sharing credit with it because it my books are fun and it's a wonderful mystery, and there's a lot of emphasis on girl friendships, girls helping each other.
Yeah,
Not tearing each other down. The romances, though they exist, are secondary to the relationship of the 4 girls that go from being sort of like reluctant co-workers, so to speak, to friends. And they were true to that. They were true to the 2 things that mattered to me, which was that aspect and the diversity aspect. And as long as they kept those intact, I was going to be A-okay.
awesome. Wow. Okay, so just watching the time here, we'll wrap up now, and I always wrap up with the that fill in the blank of I love it when writers, authors, editors, publishers, agents, whatever do X, and I really don't like it when they do X. So, how would you fill in the blank for those 2?
I love it when agent editor reminds me of what I'm good at in addition to what needs help. I am all for, I'm going to sanitize this a little bit for the podcast. I call edit letters a poop sandwich, which is you get a page of everything that's great about the book and a paragraph at the end of everything that's great about the book. And then in between is, 6 to 20 pages of everything that needs to be fixed. I am all for everything that needs to be fixed because I know that my books are not ready to go when they go to my editor. But sometimes, and I found this especially helpful in my next book that comes out, Dig Two Graves, which I just finished editorial on, sometimes it's really, really important to remember what your strengths are.
Yeah.
You can get so hung up on trying to fix the problems that you forget what's good about it, and you might end up changing the good stuff in an attempt to fix the stuff that's not working. So being reminded of what is good, of whether it's humor or voice or plotting or character, whatever it is, reminding yourself or being reminded of what's good, to me is really, really important.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that at the beginning of my sort of publication journey, and I'm very keenly aware of it now. So I think I love it. I love it when somebody, in addition to telling me what needs to be fixed, reminds me of what's really working. And then the one I don't like is when they don't always tell you the truth.
Uh-oh, yeah.
Not that publishers lie to you. They don't, but there is definitely sometimes a rosy sheen put on your release, especially if you're not a lead title. If you're a mid-list author, about, what promotion and marketing means. I am very keenly aware now, having done a lot of books, that there are books from your publisher that come out at the same time as yours that are going to get a lot of marketing and publicity and push. We talked about this at the beginning. There are no surprises on the New York Times bestsellers list.
Yeah.
And others that don't. Authors that get sent to conventions, again, none of this exists right now in 2021, but that were sent to, ALA Midwinter and different conferences and conventions and are put on the top of the list for, speakers at all those sorts of things, and others who are not. Occasionally I have had a publicist or someone say, oh, well, we don't do that, when I know for a fact that they've done it for other people, because authors do talk to each other. So I really wish there would just be a little bit more awareness of, say to me that this book is just not going to get that push, Gretchen.
Right.
Great. But there is sort of like a tacit understanding that we all just pretend that everyone gets the same. We all know that they don't.
Yeah.
And so that's probably my biggest peeve about the business. I'm not the only one that feels that way, but I understand that my book is not going to get the same push as others. I just want everybody to be straight with me about it.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. It's fun because I think everyone has especially beginning writers, we all think oh, once we get the agent, everything just becomes everything falls into place after that. And like you said, no, it doesn't.
I wish it was that easy. And I know it's impossible to tell an unagented author or an unpublished author that, that it only gets harder. But the reality is it only gets harder. Getting published is really hard. Staying published, twice as hard, honestly.
Yeah, staying published. That's the... By the way, just quick question. I'm looking at your covers now. Did you have any input? The Murder Trending covers are hilarious. I mean,
they're so good. No, Marcy Senders at Hyperion at Disney did those. I had no input. I didn't see them until they had, everyone had signed off on them. But, wow. Oh, God, they're just so good. And I send her, every time I see a new cover that she does for me, I'm just like, thank you. Oh, my God.
And then once they did the Netflix adaptation of The Get Even, they replaced those covers with the,
they call it a TV tie-in edition, or if it was a movie, they would be a movie tie-in edition, and those are really common. Once they've done an adaptation, they work with the production company or the network or whatever to do the art so that it ties in.
And that means that they don't put out the original cover anymore. They only do the tie-in edition, or you'll still see kind of both?
As far as I know, they're only doing the tie-in edition.
Right. Okay. I just think it just came, and it's in my mind, so I figured I'd ask it.
Oh yeah, no. And again, I actually don't know 100% for sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what they told me.
Right. Well, and we think they were being honest that time, so yeah. All right. Well, very good. Gretchen, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for speaking with us. And this is great. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for providing this for writers. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for them to hear about all different types of business.
This was a bonus episode of Oh My Word podcast featuring author Gretchen McNeil. To find out more about Gretchen and her work, please visit the link in the episode notes. To find out more about Oh My Word podcast, subscribe, follow us, keep track of all the things we're up to. Please follow us on Instagram at Oh My Word Podcast or check us out at el10inbound.com. Thanks so much for joining us. Catch you next time.